Providing public goods. In the last lecture, we talked about the basic problem with public goods, the free rider problem, where if someone pays for the public good, no one can be excluded from using it, so therefore no one really wants to pay for it. They all want to rely on someone else paying for it. This is the basic market failure associated with public goods. So we need some form of public coordination mechanism in which people decide jointly how much of the public good to provide, and then they pay jointly for a portion of the costs. Okay, here's the theoretical way of attacking this problem. Instead of asking people the question we usually do when we are asking when we're formulating a demand schedule. So instead of asking people to pay to use the public good, ask people how much they would be willing to pay for provision of different levels of the public good, and add up the amounts that they're willing to pay to get the total social willingness to pay for the good. This is the social demand for the public good. Example, if you were to ask everyone, how much are you willing to pay for a year? How much are you willing to pay a year for the road network to exist? And add up the answer that everyone gives you amongst people saying yes, and then see if it's enough to actually build the road network. So this is what the solution looks like graphically. This is different from, it looks very much like the way we formulated demand schedules back at the beginning of the course, but we're doing things differently. If you remember back at the beginning of the course, at each price level, we added horizontally the quantity that people were willing to buy. Now we're adding prices, essentially. So for this quantity here, you ask people how much you would be willing to pay for that. And person one says, I'd be willing to pay this much. Person two says, I'd be willing to pay this much. So you add those up and you get the total for society. And you do that at various different levels of output of the public good. So instead of adding horizontally across quantity like we did with a normal demand curve, here we're adding vertically, we're adding up the prices, how much everyone wants to pay. Okay, that sounds really abstract and unrealistic, but it's actually pretty close to how decisions about public expenditures are actually made. Here's an example. A bond referendum on a state or local ballot. The government proposes an extension to the highway. It proposes selling bonds, which will be paid for by a small tax increase for each person or each taxpayer in the community. The public votes on the spending increase, yes or no, and at the same time agreeing to the tax increase. So it's not quite like that picture I just gave, but it's pretty close. Essentially, you're saying for this quantity, are you willing to pay this much? And if enough people do, that will end up financing the public good. And in presidential elections, candidates typically propose platforms with their policies, including how much they want to spend on infrastructure and various types of public goods. And their opponents criticize those proposals by telling everyone how much they think they'll cost. Notice that in these proposals, in this policy argument, no one person is being asked to pay for the full public good. The argument is essentially over how big the government budget should be. Are you willing to accept a government budget this big, which will probably have some sort of a tax implication for you? Or are you not? So it's kind of similar on a national level to that local bond issue. There's a whole area of economics devoted to the best way to make decisions about public goods. It's called public choice theory, and there's lots of theory about how you should structure elections, how you should ask these questions, how to conduct surveys on people's willingness to pay, all kinds of stuff on different ways of getting public input on expenditure decisions. Obviously, we don't have time to go into that topic in this course, but this should give you an idea about how the government, by coordinating all of us, can provide public goods and get around the free rider problem.